My name is Penny C., and I'm a former director of the Principal Foundation. I was there from 2004 until 2011, at which time then I went into the public practice of Christian Science. One of the first cases that I had when I first came to the Principal Foundation was a call from a woman who was a toll booth operator on the East Coast. And she had just learned fairly recently about Christian Science. And she wanted to know if we could help her get a car. And I said, well, we couldn't do that, but just talk to her about what she was learning. And we chatted about that with God, all things were possible. And just because she didn't know a lot about Christian Science didn't mean that God wasn't going to help her. He helps all of us and meets us where we need him. And just talk to her generally about all things being possible to God. She didn't have any books. She didn't have really any reading material. So I was able to send her journals and sentinels and just some reading material for her to become a little bit more familiar. So she received the periodicals I mailed to her and read them. She called back right soon afterwards, probably the next day, and said she was so excited by what she had read. And when she went to work that day, she said a man came up to her booth and said, by the way, I would like to give you a car. And she was just absolutely incredulous. And they didn't have time to really talk about it. And she said, I don't have, anything to pay though for the insurance or the other things that come with a car. And I said, again, all things work together. You're not going to be given a car with not being able to drive it or use it. So the man came back and told her he was paying for the whole thing. He would pay the insurance, any of the license fees and so on. The only thing he expected her to do was to pay for the title. And she could do that. It wasn't a new car, but it was one he said was in very good condition and would be of help to her getting to and from work. Well, she was just, as you can imagine, thrilled to see God at work so quickly and in such a practical way. We were able to get her Science and Health. I think we sent a copy to her, and some of the other books that we had, they weren't brand new copies, but they were copies that she could use for now, which she did. She started reading Science and Health right away. She was very interested in prose works. She found that very interesting. So she continued to read and grow. We could not help her financially because she was not a church member. She was using drugs at the time for different medical problems, and she was a cigarette smoker. And we talked about all those things and how they could pass away. And they did. She stopped smoking. She stopped using medicine. She turned to Christian Science for her needs. Now, again, this was all gradual, and she was learning as she went along. But there was healing every step of the way. It was a very heartwarming experience to see a woman who had just started learning about Christian Science, but was so completely devoted to wanting to learn, and the humility it took on her part to do just that. One of the things that was very helpful and instructional to me working at the Principal Foundation was that God always gives you the words to say to the people who call. That it wasn't about me giving them some worldly or wise advice. God meets our every need. And that is possible because we're the very expression of God that includes everything that God is. And God is all. And every idea of supply God manifests, we do too. They're manifested in a practical way for each of us. one wouldn't be necessarily the way it will happen for another. But there's nothing that God cannot do.